Hi, folks. It's time for my yearly re-record. I'm going to try to do this a little bit more often because my supporters deserve to be thanked, and I want to keep things more up to date going forward. First off, thank you for returning to the Whiskey Ring. If this is your first time here, or if you're a frequent listener, please take the moment to like and subscribe, rate and review wherever you found the podcast. If you have suggestions for how to make the podcast better, or guests or topics you'd like to hear, please reach out to me at david@whiskeymyweddingring.com or via Facebook or Instagram. Second, I want to thank my vintage level sponsors, those at the highest level who keep this podcast going. Truly, without these supporters, I would have had to stop doing this a long time ago. Thank you specifically to Don, to John and Jim, Bill and Connor, Steve, Jake and Bill, Trevor, Michael and Jesse, Jared, Brendan and Larry, Logan, Patrick and Andrew, Dustin, Wade and Gavin, Daniel, and Justin. Thank you all for supporting, listening, telling your friends about this podcast. Cannot stress enough how much you all make this possible to go forward. If you haven't yet joined the Patreon, please consider doing so at patreon.com/whiskeymyweddingring. You can support for as little as $5 a month, where you can have access to ad-free episodes, and will also have priority if a vintage spot becomes available. Those spots are strictly limited, so if a spot becomes available, you're going to want to be the first to know. Lastly, going forward, I am trying to be better about posting show notes for each episode on my website, whiskeymyweddingring.com. These show notes will have links to websites and socials for my guests, and will also have additional information not in the interview, including reviews and tasting notes whenever possible or relevant. Thank you everyone for listening, and I hope to have you back as a listener next week. Hey folks, welcome to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring podcast. Today we're going back to Nevada. It's been a couple of years since we've been over there, talking to our friends over at Frey Ranch. And at the headwaters of the river that ends in Fallon, Nevada, we have Minden Mill, or near the headwaters, I should say. Got Minden Mill in Minden, Nevada, and to talk about Minden Mill, Joseph O'Sullivan, Master Distiller. Welcome on.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be on Whiskey Ring. Yeah, it's pretty amazing out here to make whiskey and everything else. It's a real rare place. So I'm happy to showcase it and do my best to honor what we got.
And so let's start off. You and the team, I should say, have been doing a fantastic media blitz since the products came out in November of 24. Saw you all over social media in both ads and visiting on podcasts and such. So I will try to ask you some new questions tonight that hopefully haven't been asked before. But just to set the scene for us, you are at Minden Mill, previously known as Bentley Heritage, before anything came out even. So just give us kind of a brief origin story for how Bentley Heritage came to be and then Minden.
I mean, the whole idea with the first owners was to build something that was originally going to be one of the best single malt distilleries in the United States. And so when you look at all of our whiskeys, it came single malt focused. That was the idea. It quickly dawned, I think, on the Bentleys that maybe single malt wasn't going to pay the bills in the same way that anything else might in this country. I mean, not yet, right? Like, I'm going to champion American single malt as much as I can because I love the stuff, but I won't expect it to really be breaking the bank for a couple more decades.
Well, you
Anyway,
did say that, sorry, just to jump in, you did say bottle sales have picked up unexpectedly after the regulation came out.
yeah. There was definitely, from what my understanding is, there's definitely a pulse in that. And I've heard a lot more conversation, this is easy to confirm, just about American single malts, even to the great point where you start to, you know you've made it when there's like naysayers and critics who are just like, well, it's not going to be the thing everyone says it's going to be. That's when you know you're doing really, really well. And I've started hearing that, which means that we're obviously getting enough attention to get people to want to try to poo-poo our momentum. That's the real made it moment. But yeah, so originally we were going to be this massive single malt distillery. Realized that was not the best economical decision, and added in the bourbon and the rye halves of it, as well as the rick houses that went along with it. The original groundbreaking started in 2017 with the opening of 2019, but it's kind of hard to talk about the distillery without really looking at the totality of the of the history of the mill itself. So I'm gonna like kind of go in our time machine back a little bit. 1906, you had this big movement through northern Nevada to emigrate into California and also just settle that region. And as you go across the Great Basin Desert, there's this one little area along the Carson River Valley and down into Fallon where you can actually grow stuff. And so, sure, those became some of the first settlements in Nevada. Actually, the very first town and the very first bar, which is still in operation, is only about 10 minutes from me, and that's Genoa. A really cool spot. Definitely, if you ever come out this way, stop in Minden. That's number one. Number two would be going to the Genoa bar. But that those folks, they needed a place to grow grain and to process it, and where there's resources, there's opportunity for people to make some bucks. And so the Dangbirds, who were the first folks to really uh, develop the Carson Valley into what it is now, not the indigenous peoples who were the Washoe tribe who were here way before us in the Paiute, but of the immigrants, that would be the Dangbirds, and they dug the first well, and just a few years later, the first mill was constructed to mill the grain that fed the folks going to California, as well as the local growing economy. And this building is where we make whiskey today. It was the largest of all the grain mills. It could make 100 barrels a day, which was something for the time. I mean, we're only doing like 10 barrels a day when we're running whiskey. And and it was the very last line of the Virginia Truckee Railroad. So it's a little bit of a historical place. It's on the Registry of Historic Buildings, and it's very, very, very cool to be there because you understand this building's only ever really processed grain exclusively over its 120-year history, but just in two different ways, which is kind of a cool thing to see. And you can look at there's a lot of the building is completely maintained. There's seismic retrofitting and kind of upgrades that we did that got us LEED gold certification on the building, but there's some areas we left, and there's one little spot where you can see a lot of graffiti from that time where they all signed their names 120 years ago. And then there's one spot where there's a lot of really bad math about what they were calculating to put on the trains. So the Nevada education system has definitely upgraded a little bit since then. And back in the day, though, addition and subtraction was not the strongest. We have records of this.
I'll withhold. So as I mentioned earlier, the Bentleys never got to the point of releasing liquid, and there's a couple things that went wrong. COVID being I think the biggest stumbling block.
COVID was the biggest for sure.
Yeah. But I remember you said in one interview, I think it was maybe with ACSA, that even though they hadn't released anything yet, the distillery that was built was already well known among distillers for the technology that was being added to it.
It was famed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, when I heard about this place at an ACSA years and years ago and just couldn't believe what I was hearing. It seemed like it wasn't going to work. It was too innovative. It was too automated. It was too much of the coolest toys you could ever have.
So at the same time, you also said on spirits distilling that they were also already an estate type distillery or an estate style distillery. What did that, and we'll get more into the estate thing later, but what did that vision, what was their original vision, I guess? You said it was to, I guess, become the single malt.
Yeah, I
house.
mean, I wasn't working for the Bentleys at the time. I came on with the Foleys.
Sure.
The man who was the me before that in the Bentley years is a guy named Johnny Jeffries, really talented distiller and good friend of mine. And I can kind of relate a lot of this because I was talking to Johnny at conventions, and we were friends, and we'd hang out while this was going on, while it was being made. And it really was just about trying to have a place that was super, super traditional, hence the Forsyth pot stills, but also really kind of trying to do it in the most traditional way using highly innovative, high technology like the thermal oil calandria that heats the pot stills. And so you have tradition of the oldest system, but a very new type of heating those stills. And so you have to look at it like that. And so there's it's that, and it's also just trying to bring distilling into something a little bit more unique. There's a great thing that happens when you grow grain in your own backyard. I mean, there's the wonderful part of it where you kind of offer something a little bit more boutique and a little bit more curated. Also, you're kind of getting outside the system of sourcing all um, commodity goods, and that's really nice because that offers the consumer quite a bit of a difference too. But without being there myself, what it kind of means to me, I mean, without being there back in those first few years, what it means to me now and the whole state movement and what we're trying to go for is not just about giving the consumer something a little bit better, but it just allows me, I'm a big science nerd and I love ecology, to kind of really focus and study the land around me using whiskey as a tool for that and using grain as a tool for that. I tell people from time to time because they talk about how passionate I am in this industry, and I take that as a great compliment. But I would be just as passionate about potatoes or, like frogs or something. Like you just get me into something where I can kind of dive in, and I find it a lot of fun. Whiskey has just been a wonderful way to scratch that itch.
Oops. Okay, the side, I just realized using a separate audio. It still picked it up. It was fine. Just make sure this is on the right audio now. Oops.
Yeah, yeah. Make sure it's all good. Good. Um, but yeah, and then COVID came. I mean, should we go on to like the transition or what do you want to talk?
Yeah, so I was gonna say, and I promise, so the whole thing's not gonna be about like the pre-Minden Mills era. It's more just setting the stage.
Yeah, don't worry
Um,
about it.
some of the we'll talk a little bit about the transition. So as I said, you were talking to Johnny, and um, you've also your path to Minden,
Mhm.
even though you knew about it already. I've heard, I think, three different versions of how you got asked if you would. So one of them being that you were reached out through a
1 second.
recruiter. Was it,
Something just came up. It said, "Heads up, new recording track created is," and then it went deaf in here for a second. Is that
can you hear me now?
I can. Are we still good?
Okay. Yeah, we're still good. That was adding the second microphone. All good. I've been using the system for a couple of months now, I guess, at this point. And it's a little bit different, so it's still learning different
Yeah.
quirks about it.
I
All right,
missed
so
I missed what you were saying though. The three
no,
pathways or the three stories.
right. So I'll restart that one. So so in addition to talking to Johnny and knowing about Bentley through distilling circles and ACSA, in your ultimate not return, but ultimate coming to Minden, I heard three different stories. One being that it was through a recruiter, one that it was through a conference, and one that Dave Smith at St. George gave you a call.
Uh, uh, Parts of some of those are right. So definitely yes, recruiter. Yes,
Yeah.
was the recruiter. Dave Smith had spoken to the recruiter and recommended me, and Dave asked my permission at a conference. So all of those.
Okay. All covered. Gotcha. Oh, all good.
You hear? Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry, just something. So yeah, there's little parts of all of that. A recruiter contacted me. Dave asked my permission because he had spoken to the recruiter previously, and I asked if it was okay if he talked to me, and I was like, absolutely. I would always entertain these sort of things.
Had to clarify that because again, I've heard it a few different ways. Um, but you had an advantage in that because you knew the people at the distillery, because it was an active distillery, then sorry, does it keep going out for you?
Yeah, I think I'm back again though. Something's going on. I'm not sure what it is, but it's back again.
All right, we'll see if I can always switch over to the browser if it doesn't. Okay. So, you knew some of the people who were at Bentley, you knew the distiller and Johnny Jeffrey there. Um, did any people stay on with you after you joined? Sorry, now something's happening on my end. What is going on? Crazy. What is going on tonight?
I'm gonna try something and disconnect all my stuff, and maybe my mic is bad or something.
We'll give it a shot. Sorry, this is not the
No, no,
usual. Right?
that's okay. I've been having problems. I think it might be my setup. This is the second. I bought a bunch of new cables today, but something's not right.
All good. All right. So you want to restart your answer to that question? Sorry.
Yeah, no, that again, I'm pretty sure this is my setup that's failing. Yeah, you asked me. Oh yeah, about coming on into somebody else's team. Could you just say it one more time so I can pick up?
Sure. Yeah. So you knew some of the people who were working at Bentley, including Johnny. Did anybody stay on after, after Foley bought and then you joined shortly after?
Yeah, yeah, and that's something I always try to make very clear, which is that this team I inherited from Johnny were trained amazingly well, and it is a tradition within distilleries. I mean, you inherit them from friends, you inherit them from people who put them together before you. I mean, I got Clear Creek from Steve McCarthy, and Caitlin got it from me. So there is this heritage that you pass down. But one of the great things you can do in your role as a master distiller is like learn so much from the team. And so that would be Bryce and Chelsea and Noya, all of whom I inherited, as well as the lead blender, John Crumbly, who's incredible. I mean, basically the entire team was the same except for me. I was the new guy. And that was 3 years ago. So it's about now that I finally started to feel like I'm not a total imposter in this role,
Hmm.
which is, I don't think ever really goes away.
It keeps us on our toes. What can we say? Just coming back to Steve for a second, you've spoken of him, you know, so kindly as truly your mentor, the guy who gave you your start in this industry that you're now in 20 years, 21 years.
21 years.
And I was curious in listening to other interviews on Bourbon with Friends, you relayed something Steve had told you that you get the most inspiration and creativity from setting boundaries and being forced to work within them rather than starting from a blank canvas. Uh, do you remember at what stage of your career he told you this?
I mean, it's paraphrasing just kind of larger conversations about the nature of work. I can't recall exactly when it was. It was definitely, it had to be after we moved to Northwest 24th, because I don't really remember him showing too much of that level of give a damn about me before that. But we got pretty close when we got to that newer location. I don't really recall. It was sometime in those pre-2010 years.
I was curious. It spoke to me on a different level because I described it as like I have trouble starting something, but if you give me something to start with, I'll take off running with it. But I need a seed first. So I had to ask about that. And just one or two more on kind of your origin too. You did spend, I think, like 6 to 7 years here in New York. So, you came out here in 2008, 2009. This was before any distilleries were open in New York City. There were a couple up the Hudson Valley that had opened, but nothing in the city limits. This was before Kings County and New York Distilling Company and a couple others. You've been careful to not name which ones you worked at or helped to start up. Are you able to share that?
I mean, the one that I had the most to do with was Green Hook Gin Smiths. Which I loved working at, and I loved working with Steve D'Angelo on that. And then I was part of the beer approval team for Threes Brewing, which I hope Justin wouldn't mind me saying. He's a great guy and a wonderful friend, and I love Threes. I paid in pizza and beer for that one, but I felt like my expertise was honored. Um, and I mean, I did work very briefly for Kings County, but I had come from a larger distillery at that point, and so it was a little too small for me. But I don't think Colin would mind me saying. So I also can't lay any claim to any of the wonderful stuff that they've done. I was just kind of a grunt at the time, trying to make my way as a consultant. The biggest work I wound up doing was with Green Hook. There was a few other things that never really took off. There was a kombucha thing that I worked on with somebody and it didn't really take off. And then I can't tell you how many meetings I had for people who really wanted to start distilleries and never really saw it going. But I would say more than anything, my years in New York, while being very happy with my role in the spirits industry and finally getting my dog, Gracie, pictured in a book about Brooklyn spirits. I think it's called Brooklyn Spirits. Um, I worked on a moving truck. I worked on a giant graffiti covered moving truck for a local New York company called College Educated Movers. So if you're the guy that I one time broke your TV, I am really sorry. I think about it at the wee hours of the morning. But anybody who's out there who use college educated movers, chances are you had a master distiller carrying your boxes of books.
Hey, they they're useful. What can we say? Um,
I mean, it was
so
it was an under the table job. It was like just cash. I
yeah,
took
of
it.
course, no one gets paid for real on those jobs.
No.
There's no way. No. So moving into Minden Mill, more fully. So as you said, and in my mind too, it's kind of two distilleries in one, two halves, a yin and a yang. You've got the single malt side and the bourbon and rye side. And I know throughout this interview, I'm going to probably say the two sides or the two spirits. I'm really meaning single malt and bourbon and rye as
Mhm.
one if I slip up on that. But each has, their own specifications. They've got their own stills. They've got their own types of warehousing that we'll get into. You answered a question already about what the original build out was like. But based on the climate conditions you're facing, so 10 to 11% absolute humidity, what you've described as nosebleed creating dryness. Uh, I'm guessing the answer to this is no, but was there any history of distilling in the area or even brewing in the area?
There's brewing for sure. There's a bunch of really great breweries. There's one down the road called Shoe Tree that I particularly love. Great Basin is a regional hero. There's a bunch in Reno that are fantastic. So brewing has been around. Um, Not really was there any distilling, nothing legal anyhow. I should probably fact check this, but I'm pretty sure that Nevada, if not the last, was one of the last states to allow legalized distilling. And what you really had here is a place that was, I think, for a long time, probably because of just prohibition and how the mob ran Vegas after that, it was kind of squashed the idea of making your own alcohol. But the times change, and it was part of the estate distilling license. Us and the folks at Fallon's, we were the ones to write it together. And we even a couple of years ago made a couple changes to it together as well.
Awesome. And on the in hearing the climate story, I have to ask before I forget that, um, among other places, on the Neat and Mixed podcast, you're saying that you had to deal with like a 2 to 3% angel share a month
Yeah.
in non-climate controlled
Yes.
aging.
Yes, and
So,
actually it could get up as much as 5 as it's been, widely hyperbolically charmed by myself and our brand ambassador. I would say, 2 on a good day, I if in the summer, 4 or 5, no.
so I'm not even sure if there's any left, but I mean, did anyone age out some of that liquid to see just kind of what would happen or how long it would go?
Oh, we still have that stuff. It's still in a barrel. I'm not sure if it will ever see the light of day. It's it's pretty it's pretty aggressive on every sense you could possibly have in your body. It's intense stuff.
And so, in addition to this ridiculously low humidity, I was trying to think of other places that we've had other distilleries on that are on in the high desert, Santa Fe spirits or uh, geez, whiskey del Bach in the high desert. So I've seen it, but I don't think it's ever been articulated as that level. We'll get into this a little more in terms of the warehouses, but you climate control for temperature and humidity, but not for pressure, because I mean, it's just not really practical to have pressurized warehouses. But besides the more kind of overt changes that you have to make on a day-to-day process, lower cuts, boiling temperatures, are there any other ways in which pressure, being almost 5,000 feet up, affects the day-to-day production?
That's a really good question, and I've been asked that. I've only been asked that once before, and I've given it some thought. The only thing I could really think of, I mean, yeah, we talked about boiling points. That was apparent, like literally on the very first morning, because I was boiling water in an electric teapot to make coffee, and I saw it was like rolling at 203 or wherever, whatever it
Right.
said, I was really blown away. So there's little things like that. I would say the area that possibly it could have an effect on is is yeast foaming activity, just any sort of
Hmm.
foaming action. We do use a lot of defoamer here. We're pretty aggressive with it, in order to keep some of the what's the word? There's a great word for this. If I'll come back to it later on. Um, sploon, I think that's what it's called. It's like the froth that it's like a froth that
Yeah.
biological
Yeah.
organisms make.
I,
Um,
I was
anyway,
thinking gloop, so close enough.
gloop is also really good.
Yeah.
Anyway, the that may be affected by it. Certainly, the crops are really dramatically affected by it. Out in Urington, which is a couple towns away, they grow a lot of carrots, and one of the farmers, he told me in his farmerly way that the carrots will ripen. They'll need to be harvested about 45 days early, which I mean could easily be a realistic 20, but they just grow so darn fast because of the amount of UV radiation is what he told me. And
Hmm.
you can feel it here, man. I'm normally a lot paler than this. So I think it comes down more to what we're growing than anything else, how that changes things. And it is, with this thinner atmosphere up this high, yeah, the UV is a lot stronger. That has to have an effect on the plants themselves.
Sure. And I mean, you've said that because I know you're doing, in particular now, you're in a phase of talking about the botany of rye
Hmm.
and doing a deep dive into that, at least as of an interview you did last month. So we'll take that as recent. And you were saying that the grain, I'm losing the word for what the top of the grain seed is called, the grain berry, can be desiccated by these 60-degree diurnal shifts and winds blowing right across, while the roots are fine because the roots have the underground water supply.
Yeah, we saw that same thing happen 2 years ago on our rye crop. We had, I think, a 70% failure because of just this massive temperature swing. I mean, it was a heat wave for real, but you just you couldn't get them to drink enough to keep the actual head of the stalk hydrated enough to really form full seed.
At that point, it's not about if it happens at the wrong time, then you're not dealing with drying in the field, which is potentially ideal. You're dealing with just full desiccation.
Yeah, I mean, it was like I said, it was 70% loss. So some things
Yeah,
made it through, but it was not a good crop
not good.
year. Kind of a bummer. This year's rye looks amazing, however, which go figure.
Take it. With that super El Nino coming, we need all the rye you can have right now because who knows?
Yeah.
um, so moving into the types of whiskey you're producing, and before I forget, I do want to mention we're focusing mainly on the whiskeys, but you do also have the Evil Bean and coffee liqueur. I have a question about that at the end. Uh, but let's start with the American single malt. That's
Please.
where the kind of vision started and where it has built out since then. And I want to start with the Calandria because it is, I mean, it's one of the defining only at Minden Mill variables that you've got. I think there's one other distillery that I found that's using it. It's a gin distillery in Boston. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
but
I've heard of it and I haven't had it.
yeah, but like I don't think any other whiskey distilleries are using it, at least not in the U.S. Um, and so I was thinking about this, and I'm like, why? To your knowledge, 'cause I know you weren't there at the time, but why did the founders choose to have this as part of the build out when nobody
Oh,
else was doing it?
it was entirely, that one's an easy one because it's still, I mean, it defines the philosophy, which is how do you do something in the most traditional way, but also in a safe manner. And we are sandwiched between the fire department and the sheriff's station. So doing a direct fire distillation like what we used to do at Clear Creek back in the day, it's not going to happen. I mean, I don't think, not just the size of our pots, but even if you just had a smaller 50-gallon pot or something, I don't think that there's anyone that would really approve that for an industrial zone or anything anymore. I just don't, I can't imagine a fire chief signing off on it. And if there's some really good reasons, I'm kind of glad that the industry has gotten safer. And I know that makes me a killjoy maybe in some people's eyes, but like fires happen and I just want people to be happy and going home at the end of the day if that's what my overall philosophy has to be. Direct low pressure steam's great. I certainly wouldn't want to mess with high pressure steam. Those pots, these big brew kettles underneath your still, they're big vessels. You don't want to put a bunch of pressure in there because if they were to rupture, it's a big deal.
Right.
So you more want to just be sure to do everything in the most safe way manner would be low pressure steam, but that's going to get you to about 120 degrees Celsius roughly. And to really replicate direct fire, you need to be closer to 200 and certainly above the Maillard reaction, which is I think about 160 Celsius. And the thermal calandria was the easiest way of solving the problem. Like how can we get more heat in these stills without building pressure in a safe manner and in a way that's controllable? And the calandria was the answer. And it just allows us to cook at various temperatures. And we need to replicate this again someday. It's been years, but we did experiments where we did it at 170, 175, 180, 185, all the way up to see what we liked, and settled on 185 for the cooking temp for the single malt.
So, and just to clarify too, was there any thought to, or any consideration to put in a calandria on the bourbon and rye side when that was being built out?
That not to my knowledge. At that point, it becomes about cost and a few other things.
Uh, so the combination or comparison of direct fire and the calandria brought to mind a recent guest, might even be the previous guest to you, Sukhinder Singh from the UK. Like, he's adamant. He's got three things that make whiskey good, and that he's bringing back with the project in Isla. That direct fire is one of them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
specifically because, like you said, the Maillard reaction, it's different flavor creation than you're going to get with any kind of steam or anything below that 160-ish temperature threshold. Now, as someone who has used direct fire, like you said, at Hood River, Clear Creek, and McCarthy's, and has now used the calandria as well, aside from the safety concerns as you laid out, which I totally agree with, are there any other significant differences in how they function when it comes to that creating those Maillard reactions and heating the grain, or is it really just the same kind of level of heat in a different form?
I think all in all, it's a very similar level of heat. I feel it's a lot easier to control the calandria. Direct fire can get wonky. It's usually done in a bain marie, so like a double boiler type system. And you're you can if you're not paying attention to this. So my cat is using the box. I'm not sure if that's
Okay.
picking up. We're gonna
Yeah,
wait
it's
for
fine.
that.
All good.
Are you done? Okay, thank you. Um, direct fire, really, I mean, it can be kind of unwieldy at times. You can scorch things. We do our bourbon and our rye as grain on, and so you could run into scorching on the bottom of the pot that way. That also tends to create hot spots in the pot, I think a little bit or quite a bit more than the calandria does, and hot spots are places where the still is going to fail earlier. So
Mm,
that's another reason. And then also you have to maintain if you are using a bain marie, it's another thing you have to maintain. You have to make sure that the pressure and the water level in there is good.
mm,
It's another pressure valve that can fail. So it's a little bit in some ways somewhat simpler on a day-to-day operation, and I do think it delivers an equal sort of an equal amount of ester development, and it's really nice and well made. I would say the only criticism I could have is that sometimes when you're grilling steak or vegetables or something like that, and you turn around and the barbecue is just erupted, that's the best steak or that's the best char you've ever seen. So having everything in total control, that there's always a downside to that. There's something kind of nice about the total chaos of direct fire, but all in all, I don't miss the days of having to light a firebox to get cooking early in the morning and then heating something else up. Like you're kind of dealing with something that's already at a low temperature as it is.
gotcha. So I'm gonna stay with the single malt, and then I have a couple of like one-off questions towards the end about production will go both ways. But jumping to the warehousing. So the American single malt is aged in a Dunge style warehouse. So very classic, like you were saying, traditional, classic to Scotland and Ireland and all those places. And specifically, it's climate locked to Belinda
Hmm.
in Speyside region. Also a connection to Sukinder's episode. On the borders of Belinda is Tormore Distillery. So I was curious about this because was Belinda chosen because the distillery there happens to be Scotland's first single estate distillery?
No, but that's a wonderful coincidence. No, it was chosen simply because that was the style of whiskey that everyone liked the most. It was agreed upon. Same thing with the bourbon and the rye going to Bardstown. It was just a region we really liked the whiskey. If you couldn't age it here, you choose something that you enjoy.
So
But I
it,
love
it
that.
came out.
I wasn't aware of that. That's a great fact.
It came. I didn't look far enough into it to know if it was active as the first estate distillery when you were started up or when you started climate controlling. But I was like, I got to ask that. It's too in my face. Um, so in this warehouse, as I said, your climate control to this one is cooler than the other one. It's not connected to Bardstown, so it's going to be cooler. It's going to be more humid. And in general, you said too, you burnt out a few compressors when it was, or maybe it was on the other one that the compressors were burning out.
No, it was. I mean, they would burn out on both. We used to have it climate locked to the minute,
Right.
and that's a
Yeah.
little
A
schizophrenic
little too
for
much.
most
Yeah.
most machinery to be able to keep up with. So having it a little bit more week by week, smooth out
Yeah.
the edges is an easier choice.
And you have all that, especially now that it's full or filling up, you have all of that thermal, I don't know, thermal load or thermal inertia that's built up in the cask. The cask is not going to change that much minute to minute.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I mean, even in, back in the Hood River and Clear Creek days, like where we didn't have any climate control, the barrel room was the coolest room, like well until August. It was just nice and cool, and then the winter would come and it was the warmest room about until February, and then it would start to cool down, and that's just how they operate. Having it that tied is a little it's a lot of energy consumption to just for something that's not going to make as much of a difference as that. Now having it representative of that region and mimicking another region's whole ecology and just environment that way is, or sorry, not ecology, but environment that way, that does have an effect on the whiskey. As the one here is so unsuitable, but I certainly don't think it would matter for if it was minute to minute or even 5 minutes to 5 minutes. You really have to take into consideration the amount of thermal mass that's in there that's going to hold
right,
temperature a lot more than anything else.
for sure. So, as part of this interview, I did get to try all three of the products: the single malt, the bourbon, and the rye. The current single malt iteration has a mix of ex-bourbon, Oloroso, STR, and New American Oak. I think I
Correct.
got all of them.
You did.
Is the plan to kind of keep that general mix going forward, or you want to move towards like a single or maybe two types of barrels instead?
No, we're going to keep that general mix for the time being. Every once in a while, the blender will come out and say, "Hey, I just did a dummy blend and it's using one less bourbon barrel. What do you think?" And me and the other distillers will sit down and talk about it. And so we'll make little changes like that based off of what we're seeing batch to batch and what his advice is. But we're going to stick with the key 4 barrel blend for the time being with that product. Future expressions, when those are finally released, you don't know. And of course, there's going to be some direct to consumer stuff that's just specifically at the tasting room that are more fun expressions that way. But the flagships, it's going to remain what we got.
Makes sense. And then, I was thinking about this too because you mentioned in a more recent interview that with these new products coming out in November of 24, you now had your own ex-bourbon casks that you could use. Um, Before that, was there a preference for you, for Bentley, for if you could get them, where you got your ex-bourbon casks from?
Everyone was always excited for Four Roses. That would always make us happy. You kind of get what you get. There are ones. There's a couple of nice Buffalo Trace ones there. There's what else we got there? Eagle Rare. Oh no, I'd have to take a look. But I personally have always been really profoundly fond of Four Roses casks and just Four Roses in general. I'm never entirely sure why. I think it was just an early favorite bourbon for me. So it's always had a place in my heart.
We've had a lot of people talking about how Four Roses are great barrels. They always have been. I think, New Zealand Whiskey Collection, the old distillery there was using Four Roses because they were both owned by Seagrams at the time. So,
yeah. I mean, they're also
sense.
just people saying that they just are a good crew anyway. But anyone
Yeah.
is the folks I've met associated with them are always great. So the culture's got to be pretty darn good.
Absolutely. And you said on off-topic whiskey, you'd be using exclusively 36-month air-dried Seguin Moreau barrels going forward, as part of that mix for the single malt and also specifically for the bourbon and rye where you need the new casks. How do I want to ask this? Since you don't always have control over the casks that you're going to get for the single malt, the used casks,
Mm-hmm.
but you will have control over your own bourbon and rye barrels. How much thought is there to, I guess, I think I'm overcomplicating the question. Since you can only control for the new barrels you're getting in terms of total control, will that only be for the bourbon and rye, or will that also be New American Oak for the single malt?
So, what we own will be using Seguin Moreau for the single malts?
Yes.
Yes, we will. I mean, I just really like you talk about three things that make a really good whiskey, and number one in my book would be the right stave conditioning for the barrels themselves. Like that to me is the number one thing that you can be doing to make sure you have something that really can outcompete the rest of the folks out there. It's such a depth of flavor that you wouldn't get any other way.
And I guess I almost skipped this question too, but being in a state distillery, and I know your interest in grains and farming techniques that you've spoken about over the years, is there a particular type of barley that grows well in your area?
Oh, we've been using Copeland's for the last few seasons. I'm pretty sure we're using it this one. I just stick to old world barley simply for the ethyl carbamate considerations. Um, just because it's going to be low in glycosidic nitrile, and that's going to be one less headache you have to worry about if GN. For folks out there, this is a conversation about glycosidic nitrile, which is a uh, carcinogen in certain countries and not in all. Not in the US, but in the UK. And I've just always worked. Just even when I was making McCarthy's, I've always used the old world varietals of barley. I kind of have almost exclusive um, work with them, and so they've always done well by me. I'll probably be sticking with something like those. Not that I won't be curious. I have a couple of experimental ideas. I don't really want to get out there too much because if I keep on saying them, I'm afraid they won't happen. But in which would probably involve some different strains and some more interesting stuff coming from the West Coast.
Understood. And I hadn't thought of the ethyl carbonate part of it in a while. I had a period where I was really hooked on that just because the Old Crow, in particular, Old Crow Chessman, had a really high ethyl carbonate component into it, which is how they got a great mouthfeel at like 86 proof. But, and how Beam today can't replicate it because they can't get the ethyl carbonate that high without triggering the carcinogen warnings.
Yeah. It's you can tell that sometimes if you're a landmine, I'm just going to steer well away from it. I'm not gonna see how close I can get. I'm just gonna go away. I'll focus on other things that won't explode.
Within you've said you had about somewhere between 80 to 120 acres. It seems to vary that you can kind of play with, and it's usually in the context of the corn varietals that you're exploring. how much of that would you say, without revealing the types, of course, how much would you say you're able to devote to barley experimentation?
None so far. In 80, it is 80 and 120. Those are standard pivot sizes that we deal with. So it depends on what pivot I get. Um, we haven't really messed around with barley too much. Corn is a bigger focus for us. In my time here, corn and rye have been the thing I'm really working on because barley's been growing just fine, and we don't use a lot of it, so we don't really need to grow it very often. But rye can always be it's in all of our products, and I'm really proud of the rye. I find it really interesting, and so making sure it grows as well as possible without falling over, lodging and the harvest is good and all of those little things that seem, more day to day, but I get deeply fascinated with, that's been really my endeavors. And then the corn, it's just trying to find additional strains that grow it this way. We tried a Jumping Jimmy Red that did not work out. And we tried some Flint corns from the Northeast,
Mm.
which I want to try again, honestly. I haven't really I feel like we could give that one another shot and get a little bit more. We learned a lot, I'll put it that way.
So you just mentioned something that I was going to ask this question later, but I think I'm going to insert it here. It's a little bit of a deep cut, but back in April, you were on Beards, Books, and Bourbon. You were talking, is a conversation in the context of Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. And you were describing, you feel like there are two types of people. And this wasn't in a vacuum. This was in the context of that book. But there are two types of people. There's those that need to know, and those that are okay not knowing everything. And you described yourself in that conversation as the latter, that you're like, I'm okay not knowing everything. But at the same time, this seemed, to me at least, it seems to run counter to this deep diving nature that you have about, right now it's the botany of rye. You've done deep dives for months at a time on wood tyloses, on presentation on limbic system connections between smell and memory. So, it's maybe I'm reading it as you're okay not knowing everything, but if you're interested in something, you have to know everything about that one thing.
Um, I think I think it comes down to the fact that it is really, I really, yeah, I love all that stuff. Like it's all really fun. Um, but still not knowing everything. Like there comes a point where I'm okay with being like, all right, I have like I'm pretty good at this. I can get it. I know just enough to be really dangerous. And that maybe that's where I just like to stop to a certain degree, which is really understanding it. And my gosh, you couldn't have picked a book I love more than that book. Oh, geez, it's the best. But yeah, I would have. I still consider myself a person that doesn't really. Um, I still consider myself a person that doesn't really mind not knowing things. Like I like the mystery. I like not being busy all the time. Sometimes I just love to sit and do nothing at all. Like I genuinely do. I'm a pretty quiet guy.
Had to ask. With that, I'll move over to the bourbon and rye for now. So, as we said, the bourbon and rye don't have the calandria, and so they're using Carl hybrid stills. At one point, were there Holstein stills involved?
No, there's no Holstein Stills here. There's Holstein Stills at Clear Creek, and maybe an interview I swapped them or something like that. They're very similar.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Was there? I think you kind of answered this earlier, but I'll ask it again just to make sure. We asked about having the two calandrias, but was there ever a thought, to your knowledge, about running all three styles of whiskey all on the Forsyths as opposed to doing columns?
There is just kind of how those stills. I mean, because we're doing grain on one and grain off on the other. So it would be pretty hard to do a grain. It would be pretty hard to do a grain on system within the pot stills. But when the column stills are there's no when we say column stills with the Carl still, like the bourbon and the rye whiskey never goes through the columns. We're able to isolate just the standard pot in the center on that one. The columns are exclusively for making neutral spirit for the liqueur as well as the vodka.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was thinking you might need those like chain, not agitators, but scrapers, I guess, that would rotate around the bottom of the pot just to
Yeah,
stop the grain from burning.
Yeah, the agitator. I mean, it is an agitator, and honestly, that system doesn't have them. I think we would see a tremendous amount of scalding directly on the metal itself if we were to put it through there. We'd have to lauter it in advance, and it would probably be okay. But um, we're busy.
I was gonna say, do you have time to do an experimental run? Bring it over to the other side of the distillery, the other building, lauder
Pump
it,
it on. Yeah,
and
I mean, I would pump it in. I mean, there's ways we could do it, and maybe in a quiet moment when everything is on cruise control, we'll do that. I'd
see
be
what happens.
curious for sure. I've actually I've wanted and just been kind of curious about doing an Irish style whiskey on that system where we could get 3 distillations going in and finish the third being the pot. That was something that I had thought about for a little while, and then I decided that with my last name being O'Sullivan, it could become some sort of a horrible, horrible online flame war of people assuming I'm claiming to be Irish, which would be ridiculous. But that being said, I would love to see it done, and if any of I have a couple of friends who are Irish distillers. Brendan, you want to come on over and help me do this?
Brendan, if you're listening, I will get you on the podcast. I've been trying to get him for a month. He's obviously, you're all busy guys, uh, but I'm trying, working on it.
Man, he's a brilliant, brilliant man. I'm really glad he's going to get on.
Well, cross your fingers. I delayed him the first time. This is a total tangent. I delayed him the first time because I was scheduled to speak with him, and then maybe a couple of days before, Finn and O'Connor's thesis came out. And I was like, well, I know how much you guys have worked together. I want to read his thesis. So let's see if there's something that I can insert into the interview there. And then just since then, we haven't been able to reschedule, but I will get you on, Brendan. That's how nerdy I get about these interviews. I'm reading theses, multiple theses.
I mean, I will say, David, you've pulled out during this conversation, you've pulled out stuff that I was like, oh my God, what did I say? You're
I
a
had
well-researched man. I appreciate that.
I had a company avoid me for 2 years because they were afraid I was going to catch something on their labels, and their labels were fine, but they were afraid they were going to make a mistake and I was going to blast them. Which is that's not my style anyway, but
You are.
anyway. So with the bourbon and rye, if you haven't guessed already, I'm pretty into finding juxtapositions, possible conflicts, etc. So, as I said, the bourbon and rye are aged in their own warehouse. This is more Kentucky style, honoring that tradition. Rickhouse climate locked to Bardstown, and on that 2-week average, not minute to minute anymore. I was curious though. I know you said earlier that Bardstown was chosen because it's the the epicenter of bourbon and whiskey production, American whiskey production. I love craft and everything that you guys do, but it's still producing 90+% of the world's bourbon. That being said, you've also been someone who's very clear that you want to create a Nevada style whiskey. Nevada, part of the estate aspect of it. There's several dozen aspects that work on wanting to create Nevada in a bottle or in a glass. So I was curious, not that Bardstown is a poor choice, of course, but for the type of bourbon and rye that you want to create, why not? I mean, for example, Fallon down the river, a couple hours away from you, but somewhere where it's more, let's say, more favorable for aging spirits,
Yeah.
but still closer to what you're dealing with and the spirit that you want to create. If that
Yeah,
makes
like
sense.
why not make it the same as Elko or something like that? Like that
Yeah.
within I mean, that's a fair question, and it's one that I don't really have a good answer to, only because this is how the system was set up when I got here, and I'm one of the great things you do as in your role as master distiller is keep tradition within a place. I don't know if this is one I would challenge necessarily. There's definitely changes I made regarding some things, especially with the bourbon. I removed the oats in later editions and replaced it with wheat. But I think this one right now, until I personally, and it's something I need to work on, but until I personally really understand the climate and how to best use what's out here, it's going to be tough. And this when I was on the eastern side of the Cascades up north, we saw a big change in how the rickhouse performed when it was on the western side versus the eastern side with proof with proof gain instead of drop. And this to me is this to me is kind of such a larger challenge than even that was, and how to go about things, that it's kind of confounded me, to be honest with you. And I just, it's too big of a puzzle for me to solve right now. I know there is something there. Like, I agree with you, and I know that it's everybody at the distillery agrees there's some way to do it, but I don't know if we've had time to figure it out.
And maybe you need a third warehouse at that point, because of course you have the whiskey aging now that is tied to Bardstown, so you don't want to
Hmm.
change horses in the middle of a stream.
No, of course not.
Yeah,
No, and how I'd probably do that is we'd probably just have exactly what you said. We'd annex part, like one room, maybe a loading dock or something we don't really use, something that's tool storage for the moment, and just kind of do a different sort of temperature correction that was a little bit different. But for the time being, that's we need to get actually financially successful before I got that sort of capex.
we'll save that
I mean,
for
we're
the
doing fine. Don't, we're
no,
doing just fine in the industry right now. But yeah, that'll come when I have money.
we'll save that for the evil bean question. Um, yeah, as you noted, oats are part of the mash bill at the current iteration. They won't be going forward. That was one of the things that I know you said at one point you wanted to like have like 6 months to a year of not changing things, but that was something you changed like 2 weeks in. Like, this is
2 weeks
creating
in.
oatmeal in our sludge, and it's just not going to work. Um,
It was the third employee who came up to me and said that this is a really bad part of the system, where I was like, okay, this has to be looked into. Do we really need to do this?
sure. And look, I love oated whiskeys, especially oated bourbons. Um, they're a soft spot for me, but I know they can be a real pain, especially if you don't have like wide enough pipes and the right heat. It's a whole deal. So I won't spend time arguing for it, because I know the decision's already been made and done. But you did say on Bourbon Showdown that in considering oaks within the flavor profile, that oats can act, you said, like treating a canvas before painting, so it smooths out the base. How do you envision the flavor transitioning happening in the product once the oated mash bill is depleted?
Oh, it's gonna be. It's not as dramatic as I think people um would worry if we were at a different proof. I think if we were lower, you would notice it a little bit more. It just would be a little bit more of a viscosity to it. Wheat does a similar thing. It doesn't have quite the effect. I love oated whiskeys. I love all the reasonings behind it, but it just, when it comes down to things, wheat gets you most of the way there and is a lot easier to work with.
Sure. On the rye side of things, you described yourself in one interview as a turncoat for enjoying the rye the best of the three whiskeys,
Yes.
at least to the moment. Um, there were a couple reasons, but the basic rationale being you feel like that's where the terroir, sense of place, where you are, comes out the clearest. You had expected to enjoy the malt the most when you first came in. How, in coming in and trying the product as it was still aging and developing in the cast before the initial release, how quickly did you figure out or find out that you liked the rye this much, or um, that the rye kind of took that center stage for you?
It was in the job interview. It was when they flew me out. Like, literally, they sat me down and they gave me all three of the whiskeys. I think they were only 2 years old, maybe then, something about that. And the rye just offered something flavor-wise I'd never tried before. And trust me, I think all of our products are great. I stand by all of them, but the rye kind of upturned the whole category of rye to me, where I just was really expecting this black pepper spice kick, and it never really was there. And the fact that just that specific whiskey could open up a category for me when I'll be honest with you, rye was probably the one I had the least, of all the whiskeys is the one I knew the least, but I was always interested in it, but I never found one that really caught me. And seeing and tasting what our rye was doing to me became kind of the nail in the coffin about, do I leave this well-developed uh, butt impression on my couch where I've worked out my entire career to have Caitlin Bartolet do it for me, and actually move and work again. And it was worth it. It was worth it for the ride. Sorry, Caitlin. You know it's to be true.
Hey, shout out Caitlin. She's a previous guest as well. Uh, I had her on just after you, because I think when I was talking with her and the team, originally you and I were scheduled, or I reached out just as you were leaving, and it went dark for a while because I think the PR team was figuring out what to do. And then Caitlin came on right before she was elevated to master distiller. So, um, great fan, big fan of hers as well. With the rye, when you were with Doug on Single Malt Frontier, you said that the rye that's in the bottle right now, the 80-10-10 recipe, is, you said, the final iteration, um, which of course made me ask, were there other iterations for the other whiskeys as well?
Yeah, there was always iterations for everything those early years. Yeah, I mean, the first years of a distillery is when you're doing the most messing around. It's you kind of have carte blanche to screw around and make some weird stuff. The rye, however, just was the easiest. I mean, it's just such a good product, you know. The single malt you can mess around with different barrels, and really it's easier to kind of play around with. That rye blend though is that bill is kind of perfect the way it is. It's simple. I like the 80-10-10 simplicity. It's just there's something nice in simple numbers.
In that same interview, you told Doug that we need to, as a whiskey community, as a consumer community, need to revisit Western states making rye. Because all the focus, or a lot of the focus, I shouldn't say all, a lot of the focus has been on, of course, the East, the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, some in Northern Plain states as well. If you had to summarize in your view, what do you think are some of these key differentiators between like a Northeastern rye, a Eastern Atlantic rye, and what you're doing out in the West?
That's a great question. I mean, rye is really hard the rye is hard. It started in the Northeast, in Pennsylvania. I mean, the first batch was made in Boston, but it's kind of hard to take rye out of Pennsylvania. That I feel like they have a lay on it more than anyone else. Like it's just part of that whole culture out there. And rye as a grain is really interesting just because it goes up further north, because that was representing the immigrants that were moving out that way. You got a lot more Dutch coming up in the Northeast, and clearly Germans and Dutch in Pennsylvania too, which has brought over that grain. So it's kind of tied to a deeper level of tradition and culture, going right back to Europe with that community. Out here in the West, though, things are all kind of a little bit different, and I do think it allows you to have a little bit of a reset. I think all of it is particular to growing the grain as close to these different locations as possible. Because with our rye, I mean, we're not doing anything particularly interesting with the grain choice. It's just a Serafino or an AC Hazlitt. We've kind of what we mess around with the most, and those are pretty common winter ryes. So it's just a different reflection of what rye can really do. The West offers different environments that are unique, and with rye really liking cold, and you can get these desert conditions where you have a lot of cold and a lot of heat. Um, you can overwinter stuff really interestingly and then bake it real quick, and that's going to have a very different effect than giving it a more subtle and slight adjustment going, in like upstate New York or in Pennsylvania where the spring goes into the summer and it's a little bit more of a gradual transition between night and day, but also between summer and winter. Where here it's like when summer comes on, it's hot. It's hot. I'm very tan.
I mean, you're saying you could try to put out an Irish spirit, but I mean, you're not going to be that pale again until you move somewhere else.
Yeah, I'm
So,
I'm from Massachusetts. I don't like this sun. I like clouds. So
me too. Me too. Uh, so, a couple of quick questions: production odds and ends that I wasn't sure which category to put them in. The first one, we haven't really mentioned that you're one of maybe a dozen distilleries that have on-site floor malting or on-site malting facilities.
yes.
Um, you've got both floor malting and an auto malter, so making you them even more unique, I think. For for what purpose would you use each?
Auto malter is going to be for your day-to-day rye, or I'm sorry, for your day-to-day barley. Nope, you have not malted rye. The For your day-to-day barley, just for the standard flagship. Floor malting for the more rare stuff that has yet to be released. And we're yeah, for the next year or so, we're going to be using Montana malt to do our malting, only because we have to disassemble and move the malt house. So unfortunately, it's going to be in pieces for a little bit.
I'll take it. Uh, Next one is, are the fermentations the same for all three whiskeys? And are they all in footers?
They're all in fooders. They're all in fooders. Every once in a while, in a real pinch, we have to kick something into stainless simply because we are out of fermentation tank capability, but we have to get something through the cooker. But no, it's all in fooders all the way around, whether it's the single malt, the bourbon, the rye, they're all in this different sizes. Bourbon rye, 5,000, single malt, 25 to 3,000. I think that one caps off at 3. But yeah, very similar, made all at the same time.
And sorry, I missed uh, I know you like the footers in particular because they give you this micro ecosystem that's been created to get those secondary fermentations. Uh, for the initial fermentation, using like I guess an M1 or distiller's yeast for yield first.
Yeah, we're just using a standard dry yeast. Nothing too fancy about it. We've messed around. We've messed around with a few other kind of yeasts in the past and seen good results. A little bit more estery, a little bit not. That's something we'll probably into in the future, but just not on our plate at the moment.
Correct. And, I mean, look, you got the secondary malolactic fermentation in there. That's where you get so much of that flavor anyway. So I'm a fan of that. Uh, this sounds like I'm jumping around a little, but the next one is something I asked you about before recording, but I'm going to ask it now. You've spoken about planning for the 92 proof bottling strength, so 46% ABV. But just before you were about to do it, just before you were about to submit the labels, I should say, you upped it to 94 proof, 47 ABV for bottling on short notice because you had some flocculation at 92, which objectively, all things considered equal, you shouldn't have.
Yeah, yeah, and this was a real panic moment. I mean, we set it for 92 because, as you said, there should be no flocking. And we were up against the wire to really commit to 92, where I wasn't gonna say that I mean, I would be willing to say that I was 100% wrong and that it can happen at 92 way before I would deal with the headache of having to deal with correct it for every batch going forward. So we immediately, in that chance, I was just like, well, we're gonna bump it up to 94 as a just in case. We have to. There's just no other way of being safe with this decision. Panic decisions sometimes wind up a little iconic because I'm okay with 94. I think people have liked it.
It's a little bit different. It's something else that pops off. I posited to you that was it because at one point you said in your interview that it might have been because there was a higher flavor molecule concentration and they're like just more esters, so there's more to flock. But I was wondering too, could it be explained by a lower atmospheric pressure allowing those molecules to come together?
I mean, I would say if I have no idea. It was something that happened so quick and we didn't have time to investigate it because we were too busy with launching everything. And it just seemed to be the best way to avoid unnecessary conversations in the future. Recently, talking to some of the historical society out here because we're part of the Virginia Truckee Railroad, they're going to put a big 10-foot 10-foot railroad spike out in front of the distillery. And I'm a history nerd. I like this. I love this. But I did thank them for saying, thank you for now for the rest of my life. I'll have to explain what this is to every single person that walks by, which they laughed. They laughed at that, which means that they did it deliberately. And I 100%, I still support it. But yeah, that was one of those ones where it's like, man, I just don't want to explain what this could be for the rest of my life. So we're gonna make it 94. That's totally safe. It's marginal enough that I still kind of, part of me always wishes we started with a bottle and bond. Like why not just go 100 right away? I mean, now we can do that in the future. That's a nice thing.
Sure.
But I do like higher proof stuff, just like a lot of other whiskey aficionados.
And we'll tease. I know you said recently that single casks and are potentially in the future. We just saw labels come out of the TTB for cast strength versions of the products. So those will be coming.
Was that on Coming Whiskey or something like that?
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. I love this.
They had to, they finally cleared all the backlog after the shutdown. So all the labels were just flooding out. I was curious when you saw that, the flocculation 92 moved to 94, was that in just one of the whiskeys or was that consistent across all three?
Consistent across all three. You just sometimes you don't have time to really think it out and you have to choose a safe choice. And that just, I noticed it, the flock that we saw at 92, even if it was very likely just that one batch, it was a very small batch. We were doing it just for the tasting room, but it just didn't seem like a worthwhile risk. So it all got bumped up. Everybody goes 94 at that point.
And look, it's 1%, which depending on your scale can mean a lot or a little. Any idea how much that 1% ABV change cost you?
In terms of what, taxes, or in terms of bottles?
I mean, taxes, bottles, you have that, it accumulates. You have that 1% ABV that you can't spread across as many bottles now.
I haven't looked into that sort of math, and I hope that my boss doesn't hear this interview and ask me to do it.
Fair enough. Well, you have a good argument against it, though, so it's causing problems. All right, so moving on to the last series of questions. One of the reasons that I was really perhaps thrown back onto the Minden Mill bandwagon or more onto it in the first place was finding out that you were an inaugural member of the Estate Whiskey Alliance out of the Beam Institute at University of Kentucky. You're also a member, for what it's worth, of the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission, co-writer, as you said, of the Nevada Estate Distilling Laws. You personally are a member of the Estate Whiskey Alliance's research committee as well. So lots of involvement and activism and advocacy is really what I was looking for. When looking at the Estate Whiskey Alliance, for example, this built off of ideas that ACSA promoted, that AMSWC promoted. What are some of these ideas, if you can share them? What are some of the kind of cutting edge ideas that are coming out of these thought centers now?
Oh, I mean, the EWA it's a different animal, and everyone at ACSA, at the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission, like they definitely laid the ground for what the EWA is doing now, but they've taken it just to a different level. The fact that there's actually grant proposals that are being reviewed, the fact that there's actual research being done makes this an entirely different sort of organization, and its connection and fun. I mean, the fact that we can fund research is wild. We were ACSA and American Single Malt Whiskey Commission. Like we're sometimes Steve has to remind people to pay dues. Like it's just everyone's busy. This is just a much bigger entity, and it's been pretty fun to work with them. Landon, Alexa, everyone over there is just fantastic. Like they're great people to work with.
And there are a couple of members of the EWA that I've had on already, but a couple that I'm trying to get on as well, such as Hill Rock in my backyard. Also another one of the distilleries that has their own floor malting. So sharing characteristics there. So the looking forward, first releases come out in November 2024 for the whiskeys. You're now looking at, as we said, maybe later this year, the cask strength editions. About a year after the first releases, so like late in 2025, you said, and you said this earlier too, that the Evil Bean coffee liqueur is still the sales leader. Like, it's still the thing keeping the lights on for the most part. You said this is still the case, so I want to ask you that part. Realistically, how are the whiskeys coming along in terms of taking your going out of the room share of
Oh,
product?
there's the sort of thing that experience will tell you, and there's the sort of thing that, like, you see in the hopeful sales goals, right? And I would say that based off of my 21 years of experience, the whiskeys have had an astounding and hugely successful launch. Like, I really can't express that enough. The folks out there that are buying our stuff, the bottle shops, both independent, support your independence, folks, as well as the big boys like Total Wine, support the Total Wines, folks. They've just been huge for us, and I think people are really seeing what we're doing. That's a little bit different. That we're trying for new things. That we're trying to show that there's new frontiers within whiskey, and we're certainly by no means alone in doing it. I can't say that we are innovators, but we are part of that inaugural class. And I've had so much good fortune in my career that I've been part of a few different inaugural classes with things like single malt and just being early on into that. So, I really, gosh, I forgot where I was going with this one for a second.
With the whiskeys being a share of the
But yeah, yeah. So while we're not shipping 200,000 cases a year yet, but considering the fact that we've been just out for a little bit, I mean, there's still Evil Beans keeping the lights on. It's paying the bills. It's easy. It's quick to make. I encourage every distillery to make something that is a fan favorite. It's good for everyone. You can still make something that is kind of silly and lighthearted and not as serious as whiskey, and make it good. And that'll always help pay the bills. But you'd be surprised. I mean, I would say whiskey's a good 50% of what we bottle. Or a third of of the total bottling last year is probably about a third of it was whiskey, and that really is pretty surprising because Evil Bean became a massive hit right away, and we expected that to be just about a tenth of the overall bottling. It turned out to be the other 70. It turned into 70% Monster.
heard that from a few places. Either it's a liqueur or a gin or something that just explodes unexpectedly. Like in the case of a gin or a vodka or even a liqueur, they said you can make it quickly, you can bottle it. So in the run up, if you need the starting funding or to keep the lights on while the whiskey ages, understandable. Most places do that. But it is fun to see sometimes it just hits the mark and,
Yeah.
as you said, just explodes.
Yeah, it's a great thing, and I'm never gonna turn my nose up at a different sort of spirit or think that one of them is, or I'm above something. Like, I've when I was at HRD, I made a lot of Pendleton whiskey, and I know that maybe that's not the favorite whiskey of a lot of people who are listening to the show, but I'll tell you, I learned a lot about making that stuff. I learned so much about process from working in that volume, and I'm able to incorporate that into you know, uh, different tier products today. And that's, to me, I find that to be the real charm of being a master distiller, isn't just by focusing on all the real high award winners, but like learning the entire shelf top to bottom. I want to learn being able to make a competent well whiskey and being able to make a really competent top shelf behind the locked glass cabinet whiskey. Those both are wonderful experiences. And I think that every distiller out there should try to view their career that way, because you have a lot more fun. I'll be honest with
Yeah, it's a perfect segue into my second to last question, which is you pointed out one of the biggest changes that you've seen over the course of your career has been that people want to talk to master distillers now. That 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, we were just seeing the cusp of master distillers being known. Do you feel, particularly in these, let's say the last 2 roles that you've had, going to Clear Creek after Steve retired, then to Minden, do you feel that you've had to adapt or change your presentation style or even your kind of outward-facing personality, if you will, to fit that role more?
Oh, I think, yeah, 1000%. I have more get a lot more haircuts than I would otherwise. I have more than 2. I think I have like 4 or 5 shirts now. I'm not joking. These are big changes for me. It is more forward thinking. You do kind of have to mind your P's and Q's a little bit more. Social media is out there, so you have a choice to either really be mindful of the fact that people are going to be able to find you on Instagram, or get off Instagram. And those are both really valid choices. I've kind of removed myself from it, largely, just because to me it was like, oh, I already have enough of a presence online. I don't need to put the rest of myself out there. Um, but it is really kind of funny. I mean, the biggest change was that, hell, 20 years ago, when I went to my high school reunion, I think it was like the 10-year reunion or something. I don't know, when did that? I can't even remember. I went to some high school reunion and I told people I was a distiller, and they had no idea what I did. And now that's actually not a question. You tell people you're a distiller, and there's been shows like Moonshiners that really shine some light on what it is. Now, those guys have actual exposure, not just like what me and you know Jared have. But the the it is enough that, like, you people every once in a while will go up at a whiskey event and know who you are and talk to you about stuff. It's a little funny. It's also really flattering. I mean, I'm just glad that people enjoy what we're doing, and hopefully, if anything, we can shed a lot of light on the industry, and give people kind of another exciting avenue. I mean, if I'll tell you right now, science kids out there, I got a degree in biology too, and it was hard for me to find work right away until I looked into different areas like distilling, and then I realized there was a lot more ways to apply science and knowledge than I would have otherwise had. It just didn't occur to me without this experience.
I had one more question, but you answered it, so
Oh,
I think that's a perfect place.
what was the
No, that's
question?
good.
What was the question?
Was about the goodness. It actually went back to the Pendleton one as well, but it was about the science background. Now, for example, at Pendleton, you had said you learned a lot about chill filtering, which you don't use at Minden, but in using it there and not using it here, you understand the process better. So it was tying all that together.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, that's what the best part of a career is that you learn more, and then all it allows you to do is make better, stronger, more interesting connections along your process. And things sometimes get a little bit easier, but a lot of the time you just make it harder for yourself because you because I guess you're bored or something. You want to make it challenging.
what can we say? We need a challenge. So with that, Joe, thank you so much for coming on, talking about Minden Mills, bringing us back to Nevada, Minden Mill, excuse me, bringing us back to Nevada, uh, talking about the climate control warehouses, which are pretty rare. We hear heat cycling with some of the big guys like Brown Foreman, but nothing quite on the depth that you guys go into, if not same scale, and all different products. Hang on with me for just a moment after we finish the recording. This has been another episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. Please like, rate, and subscribe wherever you are listening. This keeps those 5-star ratings going on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you to everyone who has listened, subscribed, joined the Patreon, and I'll see you all next week.